Welcome to 30 Days of Python. This is day one. And this one, we're going to be talking about a few of the basic things. But before we really get started in Python, let's talk about what a programming language is. Now, really simply, it's just a way to tell a computer what to do. Rather, it's a way for us as humans to tell a computer what to do. So when we program, we're actually writing instructions for the computer to do stuff. And each programming language is different. Python has its own thing. Objective-C and Java, they have their own thing. JavaScript has its own thing. There's a lot of different programming languages out there, and they all differ in various ways. And mainly, it's because of syntax. A lot of the concepts actually do overlap between the different programming languages, but Python's, I believe, is the easiest one to start with. So that's the basics about what is a programming language and why we start with Python. So without further ado, let's actually jump into the setup process. The setup process is a little different depending on what system you're using. So if you're using a Mac or a Linux, it's pretty easy because it's probably already installed on your system. If you're using a Windows, it's a little bit more difficult because it's probably not installed on your system. And now if you're using a tablet or mobile device, there might be a Python interpreter for your actual system that is installing Python. I'll explain the interpreter thing in a little bit. But mainly what it comes down to is the installation is a lot different for everybody. So instead of trying to put it in this video, we actually put it on our website, which is codingforentrepreneurs.com or joincfe.com/projects #setup. We'll actually show you the different systems that we have currently. We update these on a regular basis, and the point of this is it's going to show you how to install Python, and it's going to show you how to install something called a Python package installer, which will allow you to install all sorts of things that Python can work with. But there is something I do want to talk about prior to jumping in, and that's the difference between Python version 3 and Python version 2. Now, the differences are rather subtle. There's really not a whole lot of difference, but for those of you who are very eager to do Python 3, you absolutely can. But if you're using Python 2, either version is going to work throughout this entire course because we're really not going to go into the depths of the difference between those two versions. And for those of you who might be wondering, Python 2 and 3 are both widely used. Python 2 comes standard in Mac computers. They don't even have Python 3 installed. So it's still very much used by enterprise. So there's really not a whole lot that you have to worry about there. Now, as far as Python itself, whether or not the version is different, the majority of Python is the same. Especially as a beginner, you're not really going to see the differences between these two things. And if you're doing 30 days of Python, you're really going to be considered a beginner because you probably don't know that much about Python, and that's exactly why you're taking this course. If you're a little bit more advanced and wanted to know the differences between the two, you would not be taking this one. But anyway, so that's the setup process, and that is a little bit about the different versions. So right now is a good time to pause this video and check out those system setups. If any sort of the versions are out of date, that's okay. You can go with the latest version. So go ahead and use one of the links in the video to get started now. So in the setup process, in those videos, at least at the time of this recording, we did and used Python 2. But for those of you who want to use Python 3, this series will be useful for both of you. It's not going to be any different. If there are any glitches or errors, of course, let us know. But realistically, what we're going to be doing in 30 Days of Python will work on any version of Python. So by now, you should have Python installed on your computer. It doesn't matter which version, but the fact is that you should have it installed. And you should now also be familiar with the command line. That is, if you're on Linux or Mac, you're familiar with terminal. If you're on Windows, you're familiar with command prompt. Now, you might not be that familiar with it, but at least during the setup process, you definitely learned about it or at least used it. Now, this is where we're going to be working with Python completely. Now, as you see on python.org, this is the website that you're going to be using for related Python stuff. There's all sorts of things there. And there's even this interactive shell. So if I click on this, it's going to actually load in a Python shell right in the web browser, which is going to be similar to something we're going to be working with. I can't promise that this particular shell will be here all the time. I don't know if python.org is going to keep it up for good, so we're actually not going to be working in that. But if it is on there and you had some trouble with the installation process, that might be a good place to actually play around with it. There are online shells, or also known as the Python interpreter, and that is denoted by these three little greater than signs. That is showing us Python. And notice it says it's on Linux, right? So this is Python 3 on Linux. Now, what I want to talk about, though, is some actual concepts, something that's actually useful. So let's actually jump into something called strings. And I'm going to open up Terminal. So this is where I'm going to be working in Python, and I'm just going to type out Python. That right there is going to be the same for all users. Notice mine says Python 2.7. If I exit out of Python, again, this is how you type out exit, and do Python 3, I can actually jump into Python 3 as well. So again, the versions aren't going to mean a whole lot. Now, if you remember back earlier, we said that writing code or programming is really just giving instructions to the computer. So we're telling the computer what to do. And in order for us to tell it what to do, we have to learn some of the syntax to do so, right? If I was talking to you right now in a different language that you didn't understand, I would have to teach you that language in a language that you understand, and then have to teach you what the instructions mean, right? So let's say that again. If you were learning a new language, a brand new English or human language, you would be needing to learn that language and then learn what the language means to actually do instructions that I'm giving to you. So the computer's not any different, right? Like, we have Python installed on your computer now, so the computer now knows the language of Python. So we can tell it how to do things in the language of Python. But before we can do that, we have to actually tell it what we mean by our instructions, right? Hopefully that makes sense right now. If it doesn't, it should make sense in the next few videos. So the first thing to do is, how do I tell it some sort of sentence, right? The thing that I'm talking right now, how do I tell the computer this stuff? So I could just write out, this is a word or a sentence, whatever. I hit enter, it says invalid syntax. Right? So that right there, this is a combination of characters, spaces, and could have numbers in there too. This is what could be called a string. So what we look at in English as a paragraph or a sentence, that is a string. So in order for Python to understand this, I can do quote, this is a word, end quote, and press enter. And this is now treated in Python as a sentence or a paragraph, right? It's not actually doing anything, but that's called a string. So this is called a string. It's very, very basic, but very fundamental. So we can also say another string is cool with periods and another thing here. That is a string. Very, very fundamental, and it's something that I can do over and over. If I press up and enter multiple times, it uses it, no syntax error, things are really good. I can also combine strings, so I can say, hi, this is a, and then remember, quotes, all this stuff, and then plus another string. Notice I have this extra space in here, right? So that extra space is actually making a difference. So if I hit enter, it actually formats it in a human readable string. I can understand this. This has all the spaces needed. If I get rid of that space and hit enter, it does, this is another string. This is another string. It messed up the English syntax. So when it comes to working with strings, it is very, very literal. Computers themselves are very, very literal. So strings aren't that useful without the use of something called variables. So you might remember back to the days of algebra, if you took algebra, to variables, and that is x plus y equaling to 10. Something like that. You might have seen that equation before, and you remember that x and y are variables that we might have to solve for. Now, luckily for us, we don't actually use them in that same way. You're not solving for x or y, you're just going to use that variable. Because if you remember, we could say b plus c equals to 10 and solve for the exact same things. So we can actually change out those variables. And strings, as well as other things in Python, become way more valuable to us when we can actually use them as variables. So to do this, we just declare some random variable. So let's say, for instance, I said ABC, and I could set it equal to some string and press enter. And notice the string does not repeat itself, like if I just did some string here and pressed enter. But instead, now the string is stored in the variable ABC. So if I do ABC, I get some string because I set it equal to it. Now, this is a little different than other programming languages. We didn't have to declare the variable and then set it. So if you've come from another language, you would understand that. But if you don't, what we see here is all I have to say is, here's the variable, and I'm going to set it equal to something. And I can use the variables together. So ABC plus ABC, I can actually combine them in a very cool way. Now, this is very early variable stuff. We are going to do a lot more here. But the point is that variables can be used, and they help us extend our strings and all sorts of things in our programming language in a way that makes it easier for us than just copying and pasting all the time, because that's not something we want to do. So now that we've talked about variables a little bit, you might be wondering, well, I can do some addition inside of strings. Now, can I do addition with numbers? And how does that work? So let's actually talk about some numbers. We're now at a point where we know some things about strings and we know some things about variables. Now, if you remember back, a string, if I typed out this is a word, I'd get an error. There's a syntax error. It doesn't understand this is a word, but if I put it into quotes, this is a word, it now understands it. Right? Because it treats it as a string. And then we can set that equal to a variable and all that. This is an example of the programming language taking things literally, right? So when you first said this is a word, it got offended. It doesn't understand this. So it's like, hey, I don't get this. So it took it actually literally. Once I put it into quotes, it completely understand it. It was cool. It calmed down. Now, integers themselves can be taken literally. That is, if I did 123, I actually get 123 back. Notice there's no syntax error. Now, if I did 123 is awesome, then there would be a syntax error, right? It doesn't actually understand that, right? So 123 is awesome doesn't make sense to Python. So if I put into a quote as 123 is awesome, then it would actually understand it. So what we see here is an integer, so a number being literal, so this is literally 123, versus a string where 123 is awesome is a string. So numbers can be inside of a string, but they can also be on their own. So 123 is an example of it on its own. Inside of quotes is an example of it inside of quotes. So to understand this more, we can use multiplication. So if I did, let's say 2 times 2, you probably know what this answer is. I press enter, I get 4. If I did the string of 2 times 2, I get 22. What? Well, what's actually happening here is it's doubling the string. So let's see this in another way. If I did ABC times 2, I get ABC, ABC. So this is a word times 2. It just doubles that. If I did it times 10, it would show that many times, right? So strings can be multiplied. Just like if I was typing it out, but a computer's smart. In this sense, I'm telling it, hey, this is a string, multiply it 10 times. Now, of course, if it's a number and I multiplied it 10 times or 20 times or whatever, it would actually give me the math result of that number. But if it's a string, it doesn't do that. So that's a little bit about numbers and strings. But what you're going to want to know too is that integers are not the same thing as a decimal number. So that is, if I did like 9 divided by 4 and press enter, so that slash is divided by, where the star or the asterisk is multiply. So 9 divided by 4 gives me 2.25, right? So in Python 3, it doesn't necessarily round it down. But in Python 2, so I'm going to open a new window here and do Python 2, right? So up here, I'm in Python 3. If I did that same thing, 9 divided by 4, I get 2. So this is a subtle difference between Python 3 and 2, but it is important to note. Now, how do I solve this issue? I do 9 divided by 4.0, same answer on Python 3, 9 divided by 4.0, 2.25. That is how you do it. You just add decimal and it won't round depending on whichever Python programming language you're using. So in the future, and by default, doesn't matter what language you're using, you're going to want to add that 0.0 to make sure you get the accurate answer. So that's it for day one. We actually covered quite a few things here. We covered what a programming language is. We covered how to actually install it. We covered the basics of strings, variables, and integers or numbers. There's still a lot more things that we can do in all of that stuff, and we will, but for now, let's actually call day one done. Great work today, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.